Hey everyone, Rudros here, and welcome to what'll probably be my last video for Opus 14. We've got to take the set out, and I am fortunate enough to be joined by Mr. Cool himself, Alex Hancox. Alex, how are you, sir?
Doing great, Travis. Great to be back again. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, it's been great. I've appreciated you. This is the third one I think you've helped me wrap up now, Opus 12 and 13 and 14,
Yep.
and I know we certainly got a lot to say about this one. And, you know, I remember when this first started, you were writing a couple weeklies. You really got into Sky Pirates. I think Vaughn kind of surpassed what people were expecting of him, and then you kind of fell off after that. I know you've been busy with your store as well, so I'll be curious to see kind of what your thoughts are on some of these as we dig into them.
Okay, yeah.
Excellent. Well, we'll dig right into the cards, and then we'll kind of have a wrap up at the end, because I know I've got some things to say about Opus 14 in general. I'm sure you have your own as well. So, starting off with Fire, first we have, let's see, there she is, Alua. Alua, this one was, I thought it would be good, and then playing with it, it really is good. The only time she ever felt bad for me was if you were kind of bricking and you just couldn't get your backups. But man, if you got your backups out, you put her down for one, and she was just such a threat, and it was kind of funny to watch people spend removal on her. And that was the thing, is no matter what they spent on her, they were always going to spend more than it cost you to put her out. All right, well, I gotta use this summon, but they kind of had to, because otherwise this card just kills them every single turn. So she ended up being really good. I never really saw her in like a shoal deck, but I don't think she even needed to be. I think she came in, she did what she wanted to do. There were times she felt kind of ridiculous. I wonder if both the power buff and the damage was a bit too much together, but what can you do? What do you think of Alua?
Yeah, really nice card. Good support for mono archetypes is kind of what people have been wanting for a while. It's normally a mono fire that gets a lot of that support, and usually the mono support we've gotten in recent sets hasn't been like overly too good to push you towards mono. Mono fire hasn't been super great, but that Allure is a really strong card with that effect to be worthy of playing sort of one color. Just exactly the same as Rain from I think he's from last set or 13? The set before.
Yeah, I think it was
13. So yeah, really like the card. I think it's pretty balanced, all things considered. It brings up a kind of point of what you said about it being difficult to kill her efficiently. It's just the sort of thing in general in the game right now that single target removal isn't at a really good spot. And also when it comes to removing the sort of 1s and 2 drops like Illua, like Sophie and so on like that, there's not a really good card that like does it and then like sort of gives you something back. There's not really anything that breaks even, so it gives cards like Illua a really good place in the decks she finds herself in.
All right, next we have Garland. Man, I still love this artwork so much. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this card, because I went really back and forth on this guy. And, there was a lot of hype about him when he came out. And there are times he actually felt kind of weak to me, where if you were playing against Bounce, they would just send him back to your hand. Dull Freeze, they would just permanently keep him down. He couldn't do anything. If they had Straight Break, they got rid of him. But then there were times when he actually felt outright broken, in that you couldn't deal with him damage-wise, and if he just kept flaring you over and over again, you'd see some decks with like Xdeath ways, and it just felt completely unfair of just like, oh my god, like I'm losing my forwards, I'm losing my backups, he's drawing cards. So yeah, I don't know, does that make him balanced? Does that just make him situational? I'm not sure, but yeah, there were times I felt he was just insane, like, ban this card, I hate it. And other times, like, well, he's not actually that big of a deal. So how did you feel about Garland in the end?
Garland's my favorite, like, Dissidia character of all the characters from those first few games. And I really just like the character. I've really wanted to like all the cards that have come out previously for him.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them, apart from that, the one that could break Rampair, have all been pretty dreadful. So I was really excited for one that on paper looked fantastic. My friend Matthew Okamoto, while I was getting excited about it, did mention that it is a 4-mana 8k with no entry ability. And I was like, nah, don't worry about it. The S ability is so sick, all it has to do is live a turn, you win the game. Turns out, he was more right than I was in that, while if it does live a turn and you do have another one and the setup is all correct, you do win the game. It just doesn't happen that often. Most of the time, it would I'd play it and it would get Typhon straight away, which felt sad because it's a good value trade for them and they get their Typhon on board, I lose my guy. And also, like, it's wind in general, the biggest problem for them, that if they have an Althea up at any point or a Chocobo in hand, if they remove the forward you're targeting, they won't then lose a backup, so you can't really flare while there's an Althea on board, and if you can't flare, he doesn't do anything. So the biggest problem was that, yeah, he kind of had to. You had to have the second copy as well, and he really feels like now he should have been an Earth card because all the recursion is an Earth. And I can't imagine they tested him in Earth because he's never been an Earth card before. But I feel like his kind of effect, that kind of needing to stay on the board, having that inbuilt protection, needing to recur the ability over in it would have actually been balanced in Earth. If it had been in that color, I think, having seen it over the course of the set.
Yeah, I did appreciate that he was a Fire Knight. I can't remember who I was playing, but they had a really cool Fire Knight deck where they would play the Gawain, they would search Garland and Beatrix, play Beatrix for 1, use her ability, now play Garland for 1. It was this kind of like nice tempo swing. So I did appreciate, but yeah, that's interesting. Maybe he should have been at Earth. All right, that's Garland for you. Moving on to Gutsgo. I'm very curious. So I didn't actually think a whole lot of this card when I first saw it, but I can't forget Eureka's words stuck in my head when, again, upon review, none of us had tested it yet. He said, I think this is the best card in the entire set. And I was like, oh my goodness, did I miss something about this? And it seems like it kind of fell off after that. Having played with him, he's definitely not my style, because I would have games where I basically would just mill myself all these cards, and I'd see this pile of cards as like, I want those. I actually need those cards. And people like just wouldn't kill him. They would just ignore him. They would freeze him. They'd be like, okay, he can get through for a point of damage. No one else is. And so I don't know. I was kind of just on this card. How did you see Gutsgo?
I haven't played a whole lot of Fire this set, mainly just because it hasn't been very good. All the Fire decks I've played have felt very medium. Gutsgo hasn't felt medium, he has felt very strong. There's been games I've recognised that I've won because of Gutsgo, because like maybe I fell behind at the start and didn't get backup set off fast enough, or had a clunky hand. You get a Gutsgo down, and as long as you can kind of survive long enough to get some cards under him, eventually you're like ball clear with something like Philia or Cesano, you'll get all those cards back, and then you're back on even footing and you get back in the game. And especially with stuff like Stern, making him 2 CP, he's been like cool in certain aggro decks I've seen. You know, going turn 1 Stern Gutsgo is very threatening, makes you very resilient to ball clear. So I think he's a great card, and I think we will continue to see him as long as Fire gets a little bit better next set, finds a bit more of space again.
Excellent. I was happy to hear that perspective. So speaking of Fire, of course, the big thing in Opus 14 is our new primals. And I thought the primal that was worth talking about was Cesano, Lord of the Revel, wild and pure and forever free. Which, if any of you played the game, is what he does. And he grows this massive size with a sword. Rah, boom, and your tank's got to block it. Such a cool fight. At the same time, I have to admit, it doesn't really make any sense he's in Fire, because in that fight, he uses lightning, as well as he talks about the sea and the sea's part for We Alone. So I have no idea why he's a Fire primal. Whatever. Anyway, I know you were kind of high on this card when you first saw it, and I remember reading in one of your write-ups that you're like, I don't know, having to give up a backup actually feels kind of not so good. I definitely saw him all the time, and he does feel better than Philia. I'm not sure if that's because he doesn't deal himself damage or because of the haste that he can go in right away. So I did ultimately like Cesano, but board wipes in general, I think, were kind of in a weird place this set because of a certain Stern Leonis. But how did you feel about Cesano in the end?
I kind of wonder now, just sitting here thinking about it, would the card be, given the state that we're in the metagame, like maybe if it was a different world, it would be too good. But what if he just didn't remove the backup and just did the exact same thing? Maybe he doesn't remove the cards. He just does 8,000 damage or whatever it is. Is it 8 or 9?
It's 9. But he puts 9, them in the break zone instead of removal. Yeah.
Yeah, if he just decided that, I wonder if that would be fine. It kind of feels like the way the game is that we need more kind of unconditional ball clears like Shantoto sometimes. But maybe that kind of, while Doga could maybe still contend with that, maybe other aggro decks couldn't, and it would just be too powerful. But yeah, it's still a strong card. There's definitely times where I think I really just don't want to sack a backup here. I hate going from like 4. I don't like playing him off 4 backups, then going to 3, and then feeling like I need to build up another backup. I just don't like losing backups in general when I'm playing. I like to set up. Once I've set up, just play forwards and summons and whatever, and not worry about playing too many more backups. But sometimes it is nice to sack off a Shantoto or some other kind of unique name backup to play another one later on in the game.
Moving on, that was Fire. That's Cesano. Now we're going to move into Ice, Camelot. I don't know how much Ice you ended up even playing, but I know I played it. I built some mono ice decks, so I can at least talk about this. Camelot was really good if you were playing mono ice, which nobody was, but he had the kind of idea from Opus 13 of it's not only on entry, it's when he attacks. Only crummy part was he was tied to your backups, so again, if you bricked, you didn't see any backups, he wasn't going to do a lot for you, but he did feel really good. He could solo some games for me if he was unchecked, that he's just taking forward out every turn. His special was probably a little overcosted. Like, I don't know, it's the same cost as a Physalis Bullet, and I don't think it's as good as the Physalis Bullet. So, but for what he did, I enjoyed him. Did you get to try him at all?
I didn't try Camelot. I'm trying to think. The only ice deck I think I played was the Ice Water Viking deck. But Camelot was a card that almost inspired me to write an article about cards that are basically almost too flavorful or too faithful to their element. And Ice has always had this problem. Lightning's had the same issue, basically, the ones that say dull or say active. We're at a stage in the game where even though it's an ice card, so it has to hit dull forwards, it doesn't have to hit dull forwards. Camelot should be able to just hit actives with his entry ability. His entry ability already has the condition of needing X amount of backups for what is a pretty low amount of damage per backup. Like, it just needed a buff somewhere, and I needed to be 3k per backup, even 4k per backup, or it needed to hit active forwards. And like you said, the special is super overcosted. It should either, like, draw a card, or it should just at least cost 1 CP less. It just feels like that card had a great lot of potential, but for some reason, yeah, unlike Allure, it's not the mono support that they needed to push.
And in an era of so much aggro, you know, it's hard enough to even get to a point where you can use your backups. So you're right that cards like this, that they have so many conditions tied to them. It's like, I'm getting punched in the face to 5 damage on turn 2. Like, I don't have time to set that up. So speaking of which, my favorite ice card in the set, Kefka backup. You like shat on this card enthusiastically in your review, but I love it. So I'm going to gush about it, and then you can crap on it if you want. Fun mono card, huge restriction. You got to get to 5 ice backups. But I can tell you this, if you get there, this card will solo the game. The fact that you can do it on their turn, it's just the cost of tapping Kefka. I was so happy to just hold people's forwards down indefinitely with this guy. I had a lot of fun. Now please tell me your opinion.
I mean, a lot of people know my thoughts on the Minwu backup from Opus 1. I really hate 3 CP backups that don't do anything. Or have an additional cost to doing something. So yeah, that's kind of it on Kefka. I have nothing particularly interesting to say apart from I just still think the card sucks.
If the clown was here, he would laugh in your face. Okay. Next, we have Chivalry. There was a lot of buzz about this ice summon when it first came out. I tried it very extensively. I did like it as a combat trick. 3,000 power is kind of where I think a combat trick needs to be. I think we're past the point of 2,000 for a single forward. And then the discard was nice. But man, and I mentioned this in my Why Ice Sucks videos, like the burst was meaningless. I never saw it do anything on a burst. Because in order for the burst to be, it means you had to have an active blocker. You had to have let a damage through that then bursted, that could then pump up this blocker that would then stop, like, so the burst might as well have not been there. It was cool, no pun intended, but I definitely didn't think it was as strong as some people made it out to be.
Yeah, there's quite a few. I think there's quite a few ice cards with pointless EX burst. Like Sidlestein's one of them. I think in my life I've broken 1 forward with Sidlestein's EX burst.
Yeah.
Ice cards in general are weird like that. But yeah, you're right. It can't be 2,000. We already have like Golem, which is 2,000 draw cards. Mm-hmm. I still think 3,000 with a conditional discard attached is like not good enough for really general use. It's only good in Ice because Ice hasn't actually had that before anyway. Mm-hmm. Outside of like Carbuncle, like it can be used on any forward in an Ice deck. I think Carbuncle's only on Ice forwards, but yeah, the biggest interesting point about Chivalry is that you can use it on forwards like Laswell or Fina to get multiple discards in a turn. And I do think that's something that people will continue to revisit in future sets, because this card, when it's like kind of like Belias in that sense, it won't really ever get bad, but Chivalry has the potential of getting even better over time as more ball clear based forwards come out that can be used with ice cards.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. All right, rounding out Ice was our legend Shiva, the Lady of Frost. I was a little cold on this card when I first saw it. I definitely warmed up to her as it went on. And overall, I don't know. Like, there's no doubt that she had turns where it was like, oh, they swung in with 4 forwards. Here comes Shiva. Freeze the whole board. I remember one game I was playing against Water, and I must have used her action ability like 3 times just trying to hold on for dear life, and it ultimately didn't matter. Very weird that she can't be played with Isail, and I know it's thematic because in the game, but in the game, so for those of you who don't know, Isail basically like summons the spirit of Shiva and turns into her. So I almost wish they had done something like you can play the Isail backup, search her out, you can remove that to play the Shiva, and when Shiva dies, it like replays Isail. Like that would have been thematic too. So I kind of wish they had done something more creative like that, as opposed to just, hey, they can't be played together. So it's like, oh, okay, cool. The card that searches her out can't be used. But beyond that, like, I don't know. I still just don't know how I feel about this card. Like, it's not that I dislike it, because I did like it, but I don't know. Maybe it was just still too situational. I mean, you're not playing this on turn 1. You know, this is like your late game ender. So tell me about Shiva.
I really like it, but I see your point. Being an ice card again is a bit weird because ice, unless it's paired with earth, isn't really going to recur forwards too often. It's got like Edolas to bring her back, but that's about it. But yeah, if you do draw at the right time, she is very powerful. She's way better than Kuja outside the expert 5/9K Kuja, and the fact that you can use that action ability sort of whenever, can use it defensively, offensively. She's got that kind of multi-purpose utility of a legend card. I agree that the Isail thing is kind of a bit jarring. I'm sure Vestale players like KP would be a bit annoyed that you can't play both in the same deck. But yeah, I really like it. I just again, I think it's a card we'll see as if ice gets more popular again. We'll continue to see it.
Awesome. Let's see where she goes. So let's talk about my least favorite element in the game, which is wind. And first we have Bismarck, Lord of the Mists, who is a Heaven's Word Primal. He is our legend, and when I first saw this card, you know, I only ever evaluate just the card itself, and I was kind of like, I don't know. And then as more like combos started to come out of the things you could do with this card, kind of the sillier it got. I mean, thank God the bounce at the end is restricted to win characters, but man, there's just some very unfun things you can do with this card, and I was certainly on the receiving end of many of those. Of course, Chocobos, you can bounce Fat Chocobo over and over again. Any win deck, being able to just freely bounce Mione or Zidane or Typhon, and it draws you a card on top of that, was just like, sometimes just felt insanely oppressive. And then the whole dull your active forwards to ping stuff kind of just felt unnecessary. And again, like in a Chocobo Swarm deck, or even just deck with win characters, and just, it was so unfair to Lightning, I felt, because it's like, hey, if you dare target anything with your has to be active response, I'll just happily dull it out of the way. Like, the more the set went on, the more I really disliked this card. And the thing is, I don't know, I almost wish if he'd been restricted to wind forwards, I think I would have liked it a lot better, because then your Typhon at least has to be a forward at the time. Your Zidane, you know, you can't just do the backups freely. But man, just, I think he's a neat idea, but just some of the what I thought broken stuff he could do just made him very unfun to play against. What did you think of Bismarck?
Yeah, I was about to say it's the best card in the set. He's definitely the best non-light or dark card in the set.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my opinion, yeah, super good card. I think I would agree. I think I think I agree. I don't mind bouncing Typhon when he's not a forward, mainly just because I've seen that is like, especially mono wind. Well, a lot of wind decks in general, but mainly mono wind. That's the only way that deck really beats aggro, because it doesn't really have a ball clear. So one of the best things you can do is play one backup, play Bismarck or play Typhon to remove their guy, and play Bismarck and replay the Typhon over and over again. But yeah, it's a card that you leave unchecked for one turn. You just kind of lose the game because it generates that much advantage. But yeah, being able to bounce Miyun, being able to bounce Zidane. Like, Zidane is I think the biggest problem. Like, Typhon's fine, because I kind of feel like you can always play around Typhon to some extent. You just can't play around Zidane. If you fall behind, once they're looping Zidane, the game is just over. That's probably a Zidane problem more than a Bismarck problem. But Bismarck is both too good, but they gave wind the elements so many more legs this set that overall I think it's a good addition, but it is a little bit too good, yeah.
That was my whale sound. Speaking of whales, rather large whales, is Sin from Final Fantasy X. I kind of had high hopes for this card. You play a lot more wind than I do. I'll be honest. He definitely fell short for me, mainly because I just found that action ability to be way too expensive. Like, anytime I ever actually got him out to the field, I just didn't really have much to pay for afterwards. Like, I canceled a few, but I don't know. I never got to that point in my head where I'm like, I'm so far ahead. Sin's just sitting there, and I'm just freely using my backups to cancel whatever I want. So he fell a little short than the high expectations I had for him. How did you feel about Sin?
Yeah, Carl's dreadful. I didn't misread him, but I kind of got into my head the first time I read through him and sort of talked about him, that it was like Amaterasu. I was like, yeah, it's just like Amaterasu. You'd pay 4 for Amaterasu a lot of the time, but then Amaterasu also does 8,000 damage if it's forward. So it kills the forward. There's a lot of things that you happily Amaterasu that you can't really Sin. And you're right, it's very difficult to play Sin and want to discard cards from your hand to negate a lot of auto abilities in the game. So it feels like a card they tested the waters with almost. It's a bit like Sid Rando in that regard. They seem to be very cautious about cards that stop auto abilities. Maybe Ashtola has something to do with that. But the card sucks.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, a card that did not suck, Typhon. So I know you love wind, and I know a lot of people love this card, and I'll be honest, I hate this card. And because it's good. It's unequivocally great. It's better than I even first thought it was. It wasn't until I played against it that I realized just kind of how ridiculous this tuck effect is. I believe that's a term they use in Magic to describe this. The only other thing we had this on, I believe, was the Umaro legend from Opus XI, which was ice and would send to the bottom of the deck. And I recently talked to Steve D of the YYT, and he was baffled that this wasn't an ice card, and that if you look at the monsters in this set that were, hey, if you control 3 of this element, back up, become a forward, the disparity in their power levels was just insane. The ice one is terrible. The Mom Bomb is terrible. This guy is an above curve body, and this effect, like, it dodges Bismarck trigger, it dodges Leviathan trigger because you're not bouncing it, it dodges a break zone trigger because you're not killing it. You're just putting it back into the deck, and it was just brutal. It was like, I would have liked it a lot better in an ice card. And again, this is one of those ones that if I was only facing a single Typhon, I might not actually mind it as much. But when you got to the Bismarck loops or the Althea loops, and you get this guy out there with Althea, like, it just doesn't even feel like you're playing the game anymore. It's like, well, I guess I'll sit here and you can just permanently dodge everything I'm ever going to do with Althea and then replay him, and then you're drawing cards off your Bismarck. So I wish I could have... I'd be curious to know how I feel about this card if I could see him in a world where it's like, well, there's one Typhon and then that's it, as opposed to this, you're board clear? Well, now he's not a forward anymore because I Althea, and then he's coming down again, and he's coming down again. And he really shat on cards like Garland, or cards that, like, I need to stick around for a turn. It's like, yep, bye, back to your deck. So, Typhon. Mr. Chupan.
Wind has never really had anything that's sort of fairly costed that can remove big threats. Typhon's the first kind of thing. I think he was necessary. I think he's more beneficial for the game than otherwise. Yeah, it's annoying when he, like, bounces the Garland and bounces the card that's going to win you the game if it lives a turn, but yeah, the card also wins you the game if it lives a turn, so it's nice that there is a card that just flat says no to that. The tuck effect, as you say, I think is quite cool as a not like a mind game, but it creates a little mini game itself, in that you can put something like Ursula's the biggest card you hit when you're playing against Earth decks, like Monk decks. You put the Ursula under the bottom 4, and then each player tries to time, the Typhon player tries to time a damage around the point in the deck where the Ursula is, and the Monk player tries to time drawing a card when that would happen, stuff like that. And I really like that added interaction to it, making you think about more things in addition to what's going on the board. So yeah, I personally really like the card, and I think it's good for the game.
I'm not surprised to hear you say that. I vastly disagree, but hey, teach their own. Okay, finally, wrapping up Wind, we've got our other Wind Primal, and this is Garuda, Lady of Vortex. This one I just felt kind of meh when I saw it, but seeing it in action, she actually did a lot more than I thought. It was a really good counter to things like Leviathan or Sternly. They'd put out this big forward, and the fact that you could just drop Garuda, boom, break it. And then, forwards have gotten stronger these days, so a lot of times I would see her then continue to draw cards, or that they would put out some sort of board entry that says on entry, kill it or whatever. Even if they played their own opposing Garuda to kill her, you still got to draw a card off of it. So I wasn't super high on her when I first saw her, but I actually liked her quite a bit as it went on.
Yeah, that draw effect is a big reason why she's good, and it just so happens right now that a lot of the removal is based on forwards that have 9,000 power or more when they enter play, or it requires you to play a forward of 9,000 power or more, like Sophie Ceremobius the Killer. She will go in and out of fashion. I think that's kind of why she's a rare. She's not universally always going to be good, but I like the way she is now, and it's another nice removal piece for wind attached to her body, and it ticks every kind of box you want for a card like that.
All right. So we'll blow wind out of here, get our shovels and our gloves. We're going to start digging up some earth. First, we've got 6 CP wall. It's funny because I don't remember if it was Viridian or who it was that said, they were playing this deck at a tournament. Yeah, right? And he said, well, this is the worst card in the deck because all it does is play stuff for free. But also, I've been on the receiving end of literally turn 1 Wool into Yasmat, Wool into Braska's Final Aeon, Wool into Neo Xdeath. And it's just, I don't know. I guess this kind of design bothers me because it seems to me, and I would love to be proven wrong about this, but it seems lately, especially since maybe Opus 10, that the only real strong design they think of is, well, let's just make stuff free. We'll just make stuff free. He just plays any Mobius card for free. Any Mobius card for free? Really? I don't know. It just bugs me. Just bugs me. What do you think of Wool?
Yeah, I wasn't too amazed when I first saw him. I think that damage 3 effect is really nice and really adds to his usability. I don't really see too much wrong with being able to play. It's kind of an interesting way to kind of fix the issue of older cards becoming too expensive for their power level. Yasmat is a really good, powerful card. Obviously, it sticks around, keeps regenerating card advantage, but playing 9 for Yasmat now is generally just too much. It kind of feels like over time it would need to be reduced by 1 CP every now and then to keep on par. Wall is a kind of nice way of doing that, being able to play Braska's Final Aeon as well, so you can play it in Wind Earth out of color. In theory, it's a nice card, and it doesn't really do any kind of massive damage. It's just another solid rare, a bit like Garuda. It does a good job. Won't always be good, but when it is, it'll make its mark on the deck.
I appreciate that perspective. That's an interesting idea of that, if you could somehow errata these cards, that we would lower Yasmat's cost, because maybe 9's too much nowadays. So design like this does help cards like that. So that's interesting. I appreciate that idea. All right, next we have Titan, Lord of Crags, a card that saw a ton of play. I was not high on this card at all when I saw it, and then kind of midway through I got super high on it, and my opinion on it has fluctuated a lot. And I don't know. I'm really curious to hear what you say about this, because we kind of mentioned board wipes earlier. Here's Titan. We can mention it again. I can say this. His damage ability, where if he sends 5 things to the break zone, he deals you damage. I think I only ever saw that go off maybe once. That just rarely seemed to happen. And there were some times he was useless because the opponent had Stern Leonis. And it's cool, I'll just raise everything out of your range, so you can't even break my forwards, which was just stupid. But then other times he was a board wipe that left himself on the field, kind of similar to Philia, but he didn't have the drawback of I deal myself damage like Philia did. So I don't know. I was kind of all over the place on this card. It really depended on the day. Tell me about Titan.
The 5 forward thing, yeah, it's amusing, right? The disparity between cards like Titan, Necron, and Palom from Opus 2, and that's a very old card, compared to Sophie. How easy it is to deal a poetic damage without battle through Sophie compared to something like Titan. Yeah, it kind of feels like Titan would have been fine dealing a damage at 4 forwards. I don't know, it kind of feels like a legend power card. Like I mentioned on Cesano, maybe it would be okay if Cesano just didn't break a backup and just did 9k. I do wonder if Titan was 10k, how much of a game changer that would be. It would definitely mean a lot, but I wonder if Titan being at 10k would have been somewhat necessary for Titan's power and kind of keeping aggro decks in check. He's still been really good at 9k. But yeah, it's annoying when you don't have an Crow or you don't have something like Carbuncle to boost him. And obviously, if they have Stern, he is useless. And all those things impact him in a way that, had we seen him any earlier in the game, he would have been a lot more useful, done a lot more damage than he does now. And I don't think board clears, that are generally answers to problems, need to be like weaker, if that makes sense. Like, Stern existing makes Titan weaker. If Stern didn't exist, Titan would be stronger. And I kind of feel like I would have liked to see a world where Titan exists before Stern, or Stern doesn't exist at all.
Yeah. Or interesting too, I wonder, because so far the board clears we have are things like the old Fiend of Valifor, damage base, Cesano, Philia, damage base Titan, not technically damage based, but power based. And again, we've got old Opus 1 Shantoto, just remove everything. So I wonder if they should make a clear that says just break everything, including your own side, just break everything other than this forward, or even maybe this forward itself, as opposed to this one where they got cute and they're like, well, we'll tie it to the power level. And then at the same time, Alex, that kind of worries me because I think that goes into the speed of the game, and that, do we want more board clears? Like, gosh, we've already gotten more lately than we've ever had before. And yet at the same time, when you have these other decks that can crap out 4 or 5 forwards, no problem, I have to feel like, well, yeah, you need more board clears. So I don't know, they're kind of in this just weird spot right now. Am I making that up in my head? How do you see that?
Nah, it's a fine balance for sure. That's what I'm sitting here kind of spitballing the idea, but not necessarily I would agree with it if it came about. But I'd almost like to be in the room testing it with, it's one of those things, who wouldn't give to have a week in the Hobby Japan office testing the cards with them, that kind of thing. And I'd like to be testing Titan at 10,000 power and stuff like that, just to see if there is a huge disparity between what seems on the surface like a fairly small difference.
That's fair. All right. So in Earth, we also have Cloud, Legend Cloud. This card was interesting. This is another one I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. I kind of feel similar to Garland. There were at times he just felt such a pain in the ass to deal with, especially if they were in a 7-theme deck, that they could just use that action ability to kind of dodge removal. And there were other times that, because I knew how he worked and how he was threatening, again, if I had ice, all right, I'm just going to dull freeze him, keep him down. He was weak to summons. And I don't know, there were times too he almost seemed slow, in the sense that if he forced something to block, it removed a forward, but now he didn't deal damage. So it actually gave that person more time in the game because their damage wasn't going up. And then at other times it was like, man, this sucks. I can't put a forward down because this Cloud's just going to kill it on his turn. So yeah, this is another one I was kind of all over the place on my feelings on him. How'd you see Cloud?
Mostly the same. It's very, very polarizing. You get him down when you're ahead, it feels strong, I guess. You get him down when you're behind, or you have him in hand when you're behind, and he feels like the worst card in the world. FF7 obviously hasn't been strong up until the starter deck that just came out, so maybe we'll see a bit more of him now that there are more kind of up-to-date 7 cards. But at the same time, he's competing with one of the most annoying names in the game to compete with cards from, and I don't know. I still don't feel like he's there. I feel like in the real world, he is just far too slow more often than he's fast enough.
Wrapping up Earth, Mr. Mont Leonis himself. Oh my goodness, they broke 10 cost. This guy costs 11? What? Granted, I can't imagine you ever actually paying 11 for him, because of course he was reduced by the amount of characters. Neat little card. I think I really only saw him in Monks. He had some insane synergies in Monks. I think I first was turned on to it by one of your articles, where there's insane Monks play where you can do, what was it? I think you put out Mont Leonis and you target a Regis in your break zone, and then on the stack you sack off like Yang and Matt through an Ursula effect, whether it's hitting something or buffing herself up. Mont Leonis comes in, brings in the Regis revives the other 2. Suddenly you've got like 7 forwards out of nowhere. It's like, what? And he was kind of a fun one to use in my Mono Earth deck with the backup Mamoti, which gives the card Brave, because when he dies, he prevents a point of damage. So you're kind of happy, like, please, I'll block with this, because then I can just let damage through and it won't mean anything. So a neat card. I will say he wasn't as busted as I first thought he was. Like, that Monk's play is ridiculous, but obviously it's very situational. But yeah, I was definitely worried when I first saw him, because a lot of these Brave Exvius cards too, I was like, oh my god, what are they doing with these? But overall, I think I kind of liked him, and he felt like a good payoff for playing in a monocolor.
Yeah, exactly. Similar to Allure, felt like a good enough card to warrant playing mono. The 11 cost is really cool. I have a friend who like collects pretty much only Earth cards and only plays Earth, and he was so excited when Earth was the first card that like broke that barrier, as you said. I was too. I honestly think Mont is probably the perfect card from the set in my eyes. I think it's perfectly balanced. I think it's exactly the right cost. Yeah, it's one of those cards that it rarely feels too powerful. It always feels like you've earned it. I really like cards that you have to earn the reward from. It feels like why I enjoyed this game so much in the first place. Yeah, bro, that card makes me emotional. I think it's fantastic.
Awesome. Good. Strong support for Mont Leonis. I will say, though, I am remiss, and I regret that I never got to see someone Zalira this guy and be like, is that an 11 cost? Zalira the Death Seraph. Finally, there's a card for it to take out. Because he always wondered why it had that text. I was like, why does it have 11 and 13 on there? Just wait till we get that 13 cost. All right. Moving on from Earth to Lightning. I believe this was your spoiler, Mr. Xdeath himself. I loved this backup. I thought this was one of the... If ever I was going to pay 8 CP for a card, this is how I want to do it. Forget Zondi, forget Philia. To me, this is exactly what you need to be getting out of 8 CP. Indiscriminate break on your opponent, you develop a backup, and you get to play a 4 cost completely for free. And they very smartly didn't restrict it to... well, their opponent, their forward has to be such and such cost. It has to be a lightning forward. No, it was like, nope, indiscriminate break, 4 cost or less, and you get a backup. So cool. It sucked, of course, if like you had it turn 1, but man, this just felt like such a fun card to play down. And that special was great too. My buddy actually built it was mainly like Fire Earth, but he had Tyro and he had this in here, and he legit just kept using Kusith to recur the Xdeath special and just black hole, black hole, black hole. Like, it was cool. I love this card. How did you think about your spoiler at the end of the set?
I wasn't so excited at first, but kind of just having seen him in action a little bit. It's again much like Garland. I think if this had been an Earth card, it would have been great. And because it's a Lightning card, and because Lightning is just an absolutely dreadful element, it feels like it's got a lot of wasted potential there. I know people have already been talking about using it with the upcoming Rocco Akbel, I think he's called, the new legend from 15 in Earth, where they want to use Xdeath to bring him back and then use his effect to recur black holes every turn, which sounds cool. I think that actually might be a thing. So yeah, a card that, because of stuff like that, I think, again, will get better as the targets for his revival ability get better as well. So yeah, I like it. Just, purple is sad.
You know, it's funny you say that, because it's kind of a weird thing, right? If he's an Earth, he obviously would fit in there, but then not only does that continue to make Earth stronger, it just makes Lightning weaker. So you need cards like this. If you want to ever make Lightning good, it needs cards like this. Like, it needs cards in that element, because if you keep giving stuff to Earth, well, then it's just going to keep making this cycle of like, well, yeah, I'm not going to pick Lightning because there's nothing good there. And then, so I'm glad he's in Lightning, and I'm curious to see how he'll do in the future. Mwahaha, puny mortals. All right, next we have, man, did I try to make this card work? Ravana, Savior of the Nath. Again, so this is where they clearly got mixed up between him and Cesano when Ravana enters, not when he enters the field, but when he enters in the game. Literally, his 4 swords come down and start spinning around and make this circle of fire, and his whole arena is red. Like, he should have been in fire, and Cesano should have been in lightning. Whatever. Anyway, I clearly they're trying to do like this multi-attack thing with this card, but here's always my thought on this card from day one, which is that to make him superior to Astinian and Behemoth King, which is already 2 Lightning Legends who attack twice in a turn, who deal 2 points of damage, if you will, he has to basically attack 3 times. Because if he's only attacking twice, then what's the point of playing him over those other 2? And it was just so hard. Like, there is no cheap way to do this. And maybe that was on purpose, and maybe that was a good thing, but there is no way to just like, oh, for free every turn, here's him doing this. There's actually a really goofy way you can give him Brave by having Dr. Luge on the field. You play him, you go for the Dr. Luge effect, but like you stack it so that you Kukulane Ravana so that he loses that ability. Then the Luge gives him permanent brave, so next turn you can actually just attack 4 times. Like, and there is a few little cheesy decks. Like I saw Jellyfish Guy do this thing with like Bart's Boko Palom, that the Palom would sacrifice itself to reactivate, but just in general, he just wasn't worth it. It was just way too much effort. So it's a shame because he's a neat primal in the game. He's a cool like idea, but he just doesn't work. He just currently doesn't work.
Agreed. Kind of the wrong game almost as well. Like if it was a category 11, wrong MMO. If it's category 11, maybe there'll be some things you could do with Star Sybil, like the same stuff you can do with like Regis, where if you pool enough resources, you can do a mad kind of turn. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The card's just too difficult. I'm not exactly sure how you make it easier. I think he would have been alright as a 5-drop personally. He's made no impact. So again, maybe something in the testing made him an extra CP. I'm a bit lost with Ravana. It just feels like another NAF Lightning Legend that, you know, the element really needed a boost.
One might say the savior of the NAF. All right. Moving on to the much better primal, but still maybe a little flawed, is Rambu, Lord of Levin. My God, look at that beard. That beard's amazing. This is my favorite primal in the set. I adored it. I'm well aware of the flaws of it in that it's still kind of... First of all, we just don't really have great lightning summons to work with him. We got the new Ramu summon, which is just a terrible card. Like, literally that card only exists to work with him, which is so... Like, I don't understand why they purposefully made that card so bad. Like, we'll get it, but it works with the Ramu. Right, but on its... I would never want to use it on its own. Obviously, Raiden Revenant Wings was the main thing with him, and it was a fun combo, but again, even in a world with Stern where... You know, before it resolves, if they kill the Ramu doesn't see the damage go off, and so the break doesn't happen anyway. I really liked him. I had fun using him, but there's also no denying that, like, there's just too many pieces you had to put together to make it consistent. Maybe in the future, if we ever get, like, some really solid lightning summons that Ramu can take advantage of, he'll get better. I would love to see that.
Yeah, my worry is that if he's not good with Raiden... then is he good at all? I thought he was going to be really good. I thought when I read him, I was like, yes, this is what brings lightning back into the game. Yeah, it just didn't. It's again, it's kind of just a lightning problem. The same reason Ice has any kind of problem with card combos is that you have to draw the pieces together, and it's very hard to get the pieces back once you're kind of ready to do it if you don't have them on hand. So yeah, it's just a bit awkward. Like, it seems like such a great 2-card combo, you know? What if Fina Falafel is good, why isn't Rama Raiden? But I guess maybe we've just moved on from the point where these kind of particular 2-card combos are efficient, or as you say, you can break Rama on the stack, so there's a lot more reaction in the game now too. So yeah, I was disappointed because I really did hope this was what was going to bring lightning back, and it just didn't. And at this point, I wonder what can.
Yeah, I wonder too. I've expressed this before in other videos that I would hate to see them get rid of the dull active part, because I like that makes those elements unique, but maybe it's just too much of a hindrance. Maybe if they actually want these elements, that they just have to move away from that. So, Ramu, I hope we see you soon again one day. All right, wrapping up lightning, Roche, a card that one day maybe I'll do a video on the 7 remake and how much I dislike that remake, and I hated this character in it because I just thought he was pointless. He was just thrown in to be like, hey, wacky new dude who's like horny for Cloud. However, as a card, he's so cool. Like, to me, what I love about this design, and I said this when I first saw him, and I can attest to it now having played with him, this card is fun for both players, which I absolutely love. Turn 1, you immediately drop him. He costs you nothing. I'll explain it. I saw it. Look, he costs you nothing. You go in for a point of damage. However, for your opponent, he's a really weak body, and so he's really easy to get rid of. Or you can just put a blocker in front of him. You can put a 5k in front of him, and now he can't go through anymore. So he's fun for the person using him because, cool, free card, quick point of damage. And he's not a big pain in the ass for the person fighting him. They're like, all right, no big deal to stop him. So for neither player does it feel like, oh my god, this card, which I absolutely loved. He was a fun card. I never was like digging for Roche. I was never like, well, I got to mulligan away these backups so I can try and get Roche in my opening hand. But anytime you saw him, you're like, hey, free point of damage. Thank you. Loved him.
Yeah, I get it. And I'm sure aggro players in general were very pleased with him as well. I like backups. So when my opponent plays a Roche on turn 1 and tries to kill me, and I want to play some backups, I get upset. So from that point of view, I don't like Roche so much. But yeah, as a card, yeah, he's fine. Is actually alright design. He definitely hasn't made such huge waves. In the sense that, like, I feel like, wow, the game is so much more difficult because Roche is there.
Mm-hmm.
But the times where he does come down, it definitely changes the clock on how quickly you're going to die, which is quite interesting to work with and figure out how you're going to stop the bleeding, basically.
I too love backups as I guess you would define me as a mid-range player. I too don't like it when I'm getting smacked in the face, but you know what? I'd rather deal with a single Roche than Surf, Sophie, Ursula, Doga, or any other manner of massive forwards in turn 1. All right. Well, don't look too shocked, but we're moving away from lightning. And next we are going to water, and we have our big bad primal Leviathan, Lord of the Whirl here. I believe you wrote in your article at the start, is this the card that can save water? Is this the card that can bring water back? So I'm going to let you start off on this one, Alex. Did this save water? Did it bring it back? How was Leviathan at the end of the set?
Yeah, I think it exactly lived up to my expectations as well. I didn't think the card was too good, but I thought it was, yeah, powerful enough. Like the weakness of it that similarly kind of shared by Rama, I guess, but on a different level, is that you can break Leviathan in response or do something to it in response so that your stuff doesn't get reduced in power. So like when you're playing against monks as a Leviathan player, you know, if Ursula didn't exist, Leviathan would be a very strong tool, but all you have to do is they can't target a monk backup because you can sack that, and that's one less card going back to hand, one less reduction, and you can just sack 2 monks so Ursula breaks Leviathan. But yeah, I did like it. You know, it made perfect sense in Windwater. You set up your Althea. I like the fact that it's like not cost 8, so you can't build off like 5 backups. You can't just tap 4, leave Althea up. It feels like it's exactly the right cost. Yeah, it's a good card. Water needed a 1-card Cagnazzo almost now. Like it's like an updated version of that where, you know, finally this element that's been in dire need of a strong kind of efficient ball clear removal piece finally gets one, you know, that doesn't require really any setup. It is good.
I like that comparison, a 1-card Cagnazzo, because, man, did I love using Cagnazzo back in the day. Old Cagnazzo, Scholar, Cagnazzo again. But, yeah, now it's like him all baked into 1 card. Yeah, overall, I really like this card. I ultimately landed on it being pretty fair. Again, there were times I felt like, God, it's just too expensive. 9 is so much. And there were other times I felt it was busted. But, again, that was with Althea. I think Althea, there were times playing against this card where literally your opponent says, I'm going to scoop 2 of my backups up and 2 of your forwards die. And it's like, that's not fair. What is that nonsense? But again, that's an Althea problem. I don't think that's a Leviathan problem. And I didn't like much about this set, but of one of the things I did like, it was cool to see bounce effects kind of come back because that had really been abandoned for a long time. So it was cool to actually see a payoff of that. I was like, oh no, it's actually worth it to bounce now. So yeah, I think it's a big thumbs up from me. Next, we have a card that's kind of near and dear to my heart. This is Goldbez. So this was a card I took to R4 and played in the battle arena, went 6-0 with it. And it was a card that I just kind of overlooked at the time of the review. I was like, hey, he's cool. And I just started thinking about it. I was like, what if you built a deck around this guy? Like, what if you just did this aggro, GM a bunch of 3 costs in, throw them out there, and then playing it and testing it and doing the mind control aspect? I just had so much fun with it. To me, this is more the kind of style I would like to see aggro decks be built as, in the sense that the Goldbez deck is so reliant on the Goldbez that if you get rid of this guy, if you kill him, that deck like falls apart. It doesn't do anything, which to me is kind of what aggro should be. Hey, I'm going to go in, put my eggs in this basket. If it pays off, I'm going to kill you in 3 turns. But if it doesn't, and you overcome it or you stabilize, okay, well then you're going to win. So I had a great time with Goldbez. Did you see him much over where you were playing, or?
I have seen him on Octagon a little bit when I've been watching some games on there. It's another one of those cards that, like you say, the deck centers around him so much. It's kind of, it's almost like Agrias a little bit. They have similar kind of effects. You kind of generally play him, you know, as early as possible, try and get value pumping. I just do wonder, like, if again he was too powerful with a slight adjustment. Like, he's 5 CP, but he's a card you really want to play on turn 1, so they kind of enforce you playing backups, but then his effect can't get off backups. So you want to play only forwards, because if he misses ever, then it feels like you're putting so far back. So I kind of do wonder if you know, they just made this guy a legend, leave him exactly as he is, but let him play backups, or maybe because he's cost 3 or less forwards, right? It's
Yes.
not just 3s. Yeah, I wonder if they had made it like if they could have done anything like maybe just 3 cost characters, or maybe make a similar card like that where it hits to make it a bit more balanced. But I like the card. I like what it can do. It just it's a bit too troublesome to be anything more than a fun deck you kind of play at locals.
Yeah, you are certainly right that when it's all gas, when it's pedal to the metal, it feels great. But if you flip over, your Merylweb backup or your Snow backup, whatever you put in there, one of the few cards you can't hit off of him, or another Goldbez, and you're just like, oh no, yeah, it feels like you just kind of wasted a turn. So that's Goldbez for you. All right, moving on. Jekt. I love this card. I don't even care how much play it saw. Cool card. Interesting his enter the field too. It was that it kind of had 2 steps to it that, a lot easier to just attack with a single forward. Now Jekt gets to bounce. But if you ever had 3 forwards attack, he could come in. If he ever got that effect where he broke something and draw a card, I think you kind of just won the game right there, because that would just put you so far ahead. And then just, of course, Jekt block. Coolest special in the game, and I legit built a deck around this with the Realm from Opus 12, I think, that searches out another copy of the character. Normally I didn't ever want to play that card, but it was like, oh, grab a Jekt block so I can just cancel whatever you want. Not a problem. And fun little fact out there, very hard to come up, but it is possible. I played this card with the Lunafreya backup from Opus 8, so that when a card dies, you can basically flicker it back onto the field. His text does not specify your forwards have to attack. So I actually had a turn, 3 of my opponent's forwards attacked. I blocked it with Jekt. Jekt died, flickered it with Lunafreya. Now he saw their 3 forwards attack, so he gets to break and draw. So probably never going to come up, but just a fun little thing you can do. Tell me about Dad of the Year, Alex. Cry.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think people were definitely very surprised to see a Jekt in water for a change. Maybe signifying that where he's from in like the city, in that version of the city arcade, he's more of a good guy. So he's more on Tidus' side, less opposing him, more trying to be a good dad. I like that. I guess that's kind of flavorful if you think about it like that. Yeah, the effect is really cool. The S is great. Yeah, it's again feels like a card maybe they were a bit overly cautious with, because I think that's probably right. I think if Jekt was any cheaper, then it would be too easy to play him and have stuff that recurred the S effect, and you just kind of have this boring thing of you literally can't do anything because I'll just keep recurring Jekt somehow. So it feels fair, but also feels like, yeah, if he was a 4 CP 8K, this would be way more playable and seen way more. As a 5-mana 9K, we see him, in stuff like Vikings, which can utilize his entry abilities a lot more, and maybe that's fine. He's a lot more niche of a card, but he has got very cool, worthwhile reason to include him in that S ability.
Yeah, I'm not surprised if they were cautious with him, because again, the special was just so neat, because for the first time in the game, you could just stop anything. It doesn't matter what they do, you will stop it. Unlike the Edward backup from Ice, which I love, but he's only going to stop a summon. So if they put down Philly or Titan, but Jekt literally says, it doesn't matter what you do. Blocked, bitch. All right. Let's round out water with Leviathan Summon. I totally overlooked this card when I first saw it. You and I first talked about water summons, so you're a perfect guy to comment on this. I just thought it was too expensive. And I didn't realize, I just didn't really process what it would do. I was like, 6 CP, I don't want to pay that. But it's on a burst, and it's one of the only effects on a burst, and correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think it's the only effect on a burst that gives you 2 triggers, because usually most bursts are like you get one thing. You kill that single forward, draw this card. But this one actually gives you 3 options to pick from. So God, I mean, it's still strong enough casting it, but like in Doga on a burst, all right, well, we're going to send that Stern back. We're going to send that Mashari away. I'm going to get back my Jekt, or I'm going to get back whatever. I'll get back Doga, bounce that. Really underestimated this card, and man, it proved to be strong.
Yeah, it's probably one of the stupidest cards ever been printed. I really hate it. I don't know, man. I really am heavily opposed to EX bursts that can, give you a card and effectively kill something. Even if it's not even if it's not hitting a light or dark, even if it's just bouncing. I don't like that. It seems fairly costed. It's just the cost doesn't matter when it's the next burst, because Doga's not playing it usually to cast it. If there's a Stern in their way or something, sure, they'll cast it sometimes, but Yeah, same thing with Aurora. It can create so many non-games because the EX burst is way too powerful. I hate it.
100% agree. I if it didn't have the burst, I think it would be a lot more fair. Because like you said, if you're paying 6 for this, I think what its effects are similar to Remora is totally fair paying 6 for that, but like just getting it for free. And like I said, can you think of another burst that does that? That says, well, I guess Remora kind of does that. Hey, I draw a card and I'll kill that thing. But yeah, it felt awful on a burst. A burst could feel bad enough as is. So bad Leviathan. Yeah. All right. Well, if you want to feel awful, boy, we're done with water. We're moving on to light and dark. But let's start with something interesting. Shinryu. This card kind of lived up to my expectations. It was nice to see just a solid light legend for once. It feels like light always gets a crappy card in favor of dark. And it was a neat card to see. It similar to Garland, it felt very situational. If it was in the right game, it would solo the game. It legit could just win by itself. It would draw you so many cards, or, it will just constantly board wipe them over and over again. However, there's also a lot of matches I remember I faced where their deck is filled with 2 costs and 4 costs. And so his entry effect didn't do anything because it didn't even have any targets. And then he would die before he ever got to the reveal. So I guess that overall makes him yeah, he's kind of right where he needs to be. Like in the right situation, he's going to wreck shop. And in the wrong situation, he's not going to do anything. What'd you think of our big dragon?
Again, a card kind of like Garuda that we'll see play more or less depending on what the meta is at. It's kind of annoying that he comes at a time where he would have been the perfect card if Sophie cost 3, if Ursula cost not 6, but yeah, that kind of thing. Like the numbers are just a bit off for where the meta's currently at, and it's pretty annoying that a card that universally fits into every deck because it's light could have solved so many problems if they were the right cost. Yeah, I like the card. I think we'll see more of it in the future. Right now, it's just kind of leaves you a bit bitter, knowing that it still doesn't really do anything in the Sophie matchups.
Next, we have a card I was very worried about when I first saw it, because I've got PTSD, stands for post-traumatic Sophie disorder. And then I was like, oh god, more passive damage, and that's Omega. However, playing him, I came to the conclusion that this is what Sophie should have been. He's a 5-cost card. He's dark, so that makes a big difference. But then I find him interesting because I like cards that are interesting for both players, and to me, Omega is. He has a time he is strong for the person using him, but he also has a clear window where you can get him, and while, again, his effect is kind of going to depend on the deck you're facing. If you're against fire, he's really strong because fire wants to break everything through damage. But if you're against water that bounces, or a Typhon, which is just going to sneeze him away, his counter doesn't even do anything for you. This was the card I ran at R4. I had a really good time building that Omega wall and shooting the flares. I like this card a lot. I think he's really fun. Opus is over. Alex, what'd you think of Omega?
Yeah, I saw him a little bit at the start of the set because people were still pretty hot on Mono Fire, and like you say, it kind of literally solos that matchup. Like the lengths people had to go to kill it was quite amusing, really, at times. But yeah, it's I don't know if it's wrong place, wrong time, if it's just too expensive or what. Like, we just got off talking about Leviathan, and Leviathan makes this card look like a joke. I kind of think that, again, I think they toyed with the idea of making that protection effect can't be chosen instead of maybe can't be broken, and maybe that was too good, maybe it became too annoying, so they took that away. That's a huge difference if they did, whether they did or not. So he loses a lot there because there's not a lot of removal that just kills stuff. Right now, like we say, Typhon, Leviathan, Remora, power reduction, spin away, bounce, etc. So yeah, kind of wrong place, wrong time for Omega. Feels like he's a bit too expensive. But even at a 4-mana 9k, maybe they don't want to get you in the habit of like Neo Xdeath just playing it turn 1 and saying, deal with this. It's weird. It almost feels like it could have been a nice little tech option or something really worth putting a deck around, but it just feels slightly off. And when it's a light or dark card, being slightly off is a whole world away.
Well, folks, now we have to talk about the actual legends of the set, and I kind of agree with Alex in the sense that I actually don't really want to talk about these cards, but I think they need to be put on notice, and they need to be put on blast, and we're going to talk about them together. That's Mockery and Stern Leonis. And, these cards kind of single-handedly contributed to my personal locals quitting. Like, a lot of the people, they're just not even firing right now. And I've heard so many complaints about them, and anyone who's seen them in action is just, they're just ridiculous. They're just like being able to use cards from your break zone again for free, that, as Steve D put it, and create Leviathans, Opus 1 Leviathan out of nowhere, or Opus 1 Brynhildr out of nowhere. And that's just one effect. 4K Brave, like the fact that Stern Leonis can make every current board wipe except for Shantoto meaningless is just ridiculous. Like, Chocobos is a deck because of this card. And then and the funny thing is, like, that's just the action abilities. That's not even focusing on the blanket cost reduction of all forwards are now cheaper, all summons are now cheaper. You'll see it anytime a Doga deck, even if you're going to wipe my board. All right, well, I'll just bounce them all, save them at no cost. I cannot accurately describe the deflating feeling of playing a match and feel like I'm playing a game of Final Fantasy trading card game, and Stern Leonis comes down, and it's like, oh, okay, I lose. It's literally over now. I can't do anything. You once wrote your favorite part of the game is interactability. And there's nothing interactable about these cards, because even if you try to misdragon their break zone, all right, well, in response, I'm going to throw out 16 forwards to give my guys, 16,000 brave, or nuke your whole board, or bounce my whole board. Cards are absurd. Absolutely hate them. I would love to see them get banned and ripped up before my very eyes, but who knows, Alex? Mockery, Stern Leonis.
Yeah, I feel like however long we've been recording, I could spend that amount of time talking about these two cards, and I also just hate them now. It's there's so many things to like say in such a short amount of time. It's hard to prioritize.
Take as much time as you need.
Yeah, I've spoken to people about this is the perfect kind of example of why we need erratas, because there are certain small changes you could do to these cards to stop them being completely and utterly ridiculous, notably increasing the cost of each effect by one summon or forward in the break zone, completely removing the cost reduction abilities on the cards, like the reduced summons by one, reduced forwards by one. Hell, they're even too big. Like, I couldn't tell you why Stern has 9k instead of 8k. I get why it does, because they kind of do that a lot with light and dark cards, but yeah, Stern is too big. Even 6k on Mastery is too big. It would be nice, honestly, if Ursula could one-shot her without any kind of buff. God, yeah, they're so bad for the game, and I think the only redeeming factor here is that they are heroes instead of the legends of the set. Clearly, they're the legend quality cards by comparison to Shinryu and Omega, but yeah, Hobby Japan has proven that they really don't like touching legend cards for probably a multiple of maybe legal reasons and just difficult political stuff. They only banned in EU Xdeath and L6. They didn't do it in Standard, for example. They never banned a legend card before. So, from that perspective, there is hope. I think after playing with them for long enough, yeah, man, it's fun to draw a million cards with Mastery. It's fun to be immune to any Borkler other than Shantoto, like you say with Stern. But that was like a good 3 months of fun, and they need to be eradicated from the game. They're absolutely disgusting, and they make me sick.
It's the amount of ways they could have limited them. They could have limited them once per turn, only your turn. Like, there's so much they could have, and they just gave these cards complete freedom. Like, nah, they can just do whatever they want. And, too bad you don't get to do anything about it. And again, I hate to complain about a single card so much, but it bums me out. And because people at my locals don't want to play anymore. And I don't blame them, because it's not fun. It's not fun to be against Verstale, which was a deck I felt like I could at least kind of hang with. But now, Stern came down. The game's over. I'll kill your whole board. Like, I'll do whatever I want. Yeah, I just hate him. I absolutely hate him.
There's one more thing I want to say as well that is that's probably it's not as obvious until you really think about it, but rarely does a card, or in this case both cards, does it sort of do the exact same thing for every deck, which is like not healthy, right? So Stern made Verstale good to arguably great. Like I'd say it's probably a top tier deck, but it made Chocobos from terrible. Or not terrible, but very, very average to strong. It's like all it did was put wherever it was, it just gave it the exact same boost. So all it's done is just increase the power level of good decks already, and make decks that weren't really playable otherwise playable. But that's not how you do things in a card game. You don't just print a card that's that universally powerful that it makes this unplayable stuff playable, but also makes everything else really good. They're just too generic for what they do. You know, stuff like Vikings and Chocobos, they need dedicated in element support. You know, there needs to be a new Chocobo that does something like what Stern does, that reduces the cost of Chocobos or whatever, rather than this card that also goes in everything.
I'm glad you mentioned that genericness of that. Yeah, they could just be shoved in everything. You know, he just reduces any forward. There's no limit to that. And I've been playing that Chocobo, the Burbs deck, since Opus 9 when that fat Chocobo got first released. And it was always a fun little aggro deck, but it always had one major problem. The second they dropped a board wipe on you, it was over. You lost. And now you have this card that says, I don't care. I will take dead cards that I wasn't even using, spend no resource. I have an empty hand, doesn't matter, and survive it all. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that their genericness of they just fit into everything. And like, maybe you could argue that, well, Mashri's just summons. Well, guess what the best deck is right now? A big summon heavy beast. So, all right, moving away from these two, let's look at our multi-elements. Al Cid, the man himself, gorgeous full art card. Man, he wasn't even much of a character in 12. I wonder why he always gets such art love in this game, but man, does he look good. I was super high on this card. I'm still high on this card. I mean, in theory, this card's everything you want, right? It's an on-entry ability, so it's immediate value, and then it's continued value. It's like, as he stays there, he'll continue to get effects, whether it's dulling through lightning or ice. In my head, he can only get stronger. I think his only problem right now is that he, as many people pointed out when he was released, he doesn't solve anything ice lightning has an issue with. Like, it pushes people out of the way, which is good, but it definitely lacks removal. And I tried a lot of Al Cid decks, and yeah, there's no removal there. Like, you can push them down and hope that's enough to get through and win, but eventually, if they stabilize, they're just going to come back and get you. So what did you think of Al Cid?
I think that's a good point. I also think for that reason, Al Cid's a really good card, because it's nice for that this element combination's been dead for a long time, and it's the exact opposite for Stern, in that because it's dedicated to Ice and Lightning, and the way Ice and Lightning are, whenever they're paired, it's always an aggressive deck of some kind. It's perfect for that, and it's good to release a card that is just like a power boost, a significant power boost to warrant playing the deck. I would then agree with you that then they also need something that, you know, does remove or diverges away from that. So they have the powerful generic card that you always play, and then something that also fits in that archetype specifically that does something like removal. So as nice as like Zeromus is, because that's kind of his companion card in this set, you're right, it doesn't remove, it just freezes again. What's the ice lightning? Sephiroth, yeah. He does small damage. He's a 2-drop. You don't expect him to do a whole lot. So it would have been nice if there was one of these dual Ice Lightning cards that actually did have a break attached to it, rather than being so dull focused, like, you know, sort of 75% Ice, 25% Lightning. Feels like one of those cards could have had a slightly more balance.
Yeah, so you mentioned Zeromus, got to bring him up. He was, to me, the best card to play off of Al Cid. God, I love this artwork. And he has a first line of text. He can't be Zemus. I don't think that ever came up, or Xenos. And then his freeze on both attack and entry was really nice, and he'd get hasted 3. Easily the thing that makes the card, though, is the fact that at the end of their turn, they just had to dull all their forwards. And I've kind of gone back and forth on that effect, because inherently I think that's kind of unfair, and it created this state. It became this card of, you have to get rid of this card. If you leave this on the field, you will never block it. I'm just going to kill you really quick. However, when I think of it in contrast to things like Stern, to things like Doga, part of me says, well, it needed that on there, because if it didn't have that on there, then it actually wouldn't do enough. So I absolutely adore Zeromus. It's frustrating being on the other end of it, of like, I can't kill the Zeromus, I'm just going to lose. But overall, I did really like him.
Yeah, I agree with you again. I played. I remember I had a locals a while back where I was playing against the aggro Ice Lightning deck with Sky Pirates. Unless you draw Typhon against the Zeromus just kills you, because you can never outrun them. So in the matchups where you can't kill the Zeromus very well, it feels very oppressive. But at the same time, nearly every archetype has some way of dealing with it. So it's fine. It is. Like Al Cid, it's a big power boost. The archetype, as multi-elements are meant to be, and you don't play it in any other deck really, or you can't fit it in any other deck. So it feels like, again, another kind of perfect multi-element card that it's overpowered, but overpowered for just those colors which needed the help desperately.
Gesho here. Gesho is a lightning and fire. I don't know how many people use this card, but I just liked him. He felt great in ninjas, especially playing for 4. And again, as someone, a self-proclaimed Zidane hater, the card, of course, not the character. I adore the character. You know, I hated that they could rip cards out of their hands. So when I saw this, I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God, it's Zidane, but now it just gets removed from game. Like, I don't want that. However, at 5 cost and multi-element, it felt way more fair than Zidane's 3 cost of, you know, and win shenanigans of replaying him 100,000 times. So I really liked Gesho. I thought he was a fun card.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't like Gesho and he was spoiled. I was definitely playing devil's advocate with him. I had a little deck I tried out, a Fire Lightning one, where you use like Cesano to ball clear, break Grand Pair, and then play Gesho, and that kind of would then remove their counterplay to all that, which kind of worked in theory, not as too perfectly in practice because it was a lot of setup, but I liked what the card did. I haven't really played ninjas, but I can appreciate how good it's going to be in there. But yeah, now, again, given the state of the meta, would have been nice if he'd been a 4-drop instead. I think that would have been okay. But again, I don't know what the actual difference would have been if he had been 4 CP. It's one of those cards I'd like to see, but I wouldn't set it in stone.
So last but certainly not least, a card that I think changed a lot of people's opinions is Vaughn and Sky Pirates. I know when I saw it was like, oh, great, another Vaughn. And when I saw a recent card of the week, I thought, oh, great, another Vaughn. But this one, along with some gorgeous artwork, I think definitely outperformed a lot of people's initial expectations. Alex, I know this was maybe the card and kind of the archetype you got the most excited about. So I liked Vaughn. I'm going to let you handle most of this. Tell me about Vaughn.
Yeah, Final Fantasy XII is one of my favorite games. So, like, as much as I don't love Vaughn as a character, I really like that Sky Pirates were getting some more direct support. I think kind of most people knew that the moment they were revealing that original art Vaughn as part of that Dissidia sort of showcase thing, he would be Sky Pirate support, and he is more or less the perfect card to boost the power of the deck. It's just obviously seeing spoilers now for cards like Penelo from next set. We know that Sky Pirates were 1 set behind. I don't know how that's going to affect their playability next set, if they're still going to be, or if they're going to be top tier. For now, I definitely feel like I got the deck to a certain point, and it's just not quite there. I wish it was, but I think Vaughn was huge. I really like that, again, direct synergy support. The archetype needed it. It activates all your backups, so it rewards you for playing backups, which I like doing, which Wind Water likes doing, and I kind of like cards that can cost effectively 0, like Mont Leonis, can cost 0 or less once you've reached a certain point in the game. You know, they get better as time goes on almost. So Vaughn, again, feels like the perfect card, and I really hope the support coming next set gives Sky Pirates that shot at tier 1 for a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of funny he was the only Sky Pirate released in 14. Like, was he a set early? He, like, showed up to the party. Hey, I know it's an hour early, but I'm here. And then all the other Sky Pirates are going to join him later. Yeah, he was a fun card. He was a card that had a big payoff, but you had to work for it. It never felt like, it's just like, oh, here's Vaughn, you know. So I really liked him. Folks, that's all the Opus 14 cards we wanted to mention, hits and misses. We're going to talk about the Opus as a whole really quick here. And I guess I'll go first. This is my least favorite Opus since Opus 11, which we had to play entirely online through Octagon, other sources, webcam tournaments, whatever. And it's just, again, I'm trying to separate personal me versus what I thought of it as a whole. So forgive me if I'm showing a bias here, but my locals fell apart. My locals aren't going right now. And part of it was because this Opus was so unfun to play. The game's gotten too fast. You have Doga everywhere, Sophie constantly, which is just incredibly unfun to play against, Machri and Stern Leonis, which again just turn games on their side and are a joke. And another issue too, and again, this is just a me problem, so if you didn't have this out here, but you know, the store I was at also didn't have any product. We didn't even have Opus 14. You know, I was getting older products still, so because of that, it kind of made locals a pretty miserable experience of like, we're not even getting current product. The game itself isn't very fun, and So yeah, it's been a rough Opus, and I'm honestly not looking forward to 15 much, just because at least from what we've been revealed so far, they haven't done anything to address these problem cards. And I still hear people say, well, there's no official tournaments, there's no this, there's no that. I mean, they banned Guido. A turtle. They can ban any of these cards. They can limit them. They can do something, like restrict them. Just like, I just don't want to play against these cards anymore. And you can say whatever you want about that, whether you feel like, tough it up, do it. But it's a game. It costs money, and it's something I want to enjoy. And so if I'm not enjoying it, why am I playing it? So really didn't like Opus 14. There was some fun stuff in there, but this was supposed to be the set of the primals too. It's Opus 14. 14 is one of their biggest games. This should be the primal set. Come on, and I feel like you barely heard about the primals. Maybe Leviathan, maybe Cesano, Titan, but a lot of those primals no one even ended up using. So, Alex, you own a game store. What's Opus 14 been like for you?
It's been all right. Our locals have still been consistent, thankfully. Like there hasn't been that much Doga at the locals. Hasn't been too much like annoying, difficult to be, unfun, hyper aggro. Everyone kind of just plays what they enjoy, so it's kept it going fine. I imagine it'll keep going fine. I'm quite fortunate in that regard. But I did lose one of my local play groups, basically the spoons testing, because they were getting fed up with basically the disparity between the more enjoyable decks and the top tier decks. And nothing to work towards as far as events. There's a lot of aspects of the game right now that are out of the hands of maybe the players, and to a certain point Square Enix themselves, like running big events. But yeah, I do wish there was more communication. That's kind of the main thing. It really, all it takes is communication. If they're not doing something, do they know that Sterno Mash are in a problem? Yes or no? We kind of just need to hear the yes or no. Are they going to do anything about them? Yes or no? I'd rather just hear, actually, we're not going to do anything about them because we think future cards will address the issue. That would be great to hear, because you place a certain amount of trust in the developers. That's why you continue buying their product. It's why the same reason you buy any product is that you trust the brand it's coming from. So then when that brand lets you down, doesn't communicate with you, and there's a glaring mistake like Stern, like Mashery, like the state of the meta right now, you do wish those issues were addressed and those concerns were communicated better from the other side. So yeah, I could spend all day. I wish we could have a round table with a bunch of people who deeply care about that stuff, which is probably a pretty sizable number at this point, and developers, members of staff, whoever. That's probably never going to happen. I don't expect it to, but it would just be great to hear a little bit more. Just it'd be great to hear, guys, we care.
Square, if you are listening to this, yeah, we say it because we care. We love your game. We love your characters. We want to continue supporting it and make it the best it can be. But yeah, we could definitely use some communication and help from your part. On the Opus 2, I wanted to add, maybe this is just sour grapes for me because I'm a mid-range player, but it's just aggro nonstop. It's, at least everything I've seen is, here's 3 forwards turn 1, here's 2 forwards turn 1, 4 forwards turn, whatever it is. And it's just like, I'm looking at these backups in my hand like, well, I'd like to play this, but I'm going to die next turn if I don't put out a forward, so I guess I'll do that. So, yeah, it's been rough. Rough McGruff. Well, folks, I think that's going to do it for Opus 14 Hits and Misses. Thanks for sticking with us. Have to give a major, major thank you to Alex. Sir, I always appreciate you doing these with me. I have a great time. I love hearing insight you have onto cards that it gives me a new way to think about them that I'd never even thought about before. So thank you so much for joining me. Is there anyone you want to shout out, plug, or anything?
No, I mean, if you're in the UK and you need Final Fantasy cards, look up the Brotherhood games. But yeah, that's about it, really.
Awesome. Well, I hope we will get more stuff from you in Opus 15. If not, we'll just have to get it whenever you're available. And let us know in the comments below what you thought of Opus 14. Did you have as miserable a time as I did? Hopefully it went better for you. After that, I'm Rudros. He is Mr. Cool. Folks, we will see you next time. Take care.